At 47, I had convinced myself that a quiet life was still a good life, even if the apartment overlooking Lake Briar in Seattle felt more like a waiting room than a home after years of disappointment. And for nearly a decade, my husband, Marcus, had subtly taught me to believe that our inability to have children was the invisible crack running through everything we had built together. I had spent years attending appointments, swallowing painful comments from relatives, and pretending not to notice whenever Marcus's family treated my empty arms like evidence against me. Until one rainy Thursday evening, while I was preparing dinner, my younger sister Chloe arrived unexpectedly with Marcus beside her and a folder in her hand that made my stomach tighten before either of them said a word. Marcus did not sit down, did not apologize, and did not even look embarrassed when he told me that he had decided our marriage was finished because Chloe was expecting twins, and he finally had the family he had always wanted. While Chloe stood behind him wearing an expensive coat I had never seen before and kept her eyes fixed on the floor as though she had rehearsed every part of the betrayal, except the moment when she would have to face me. I remember turning off the stove because the sauce was beginning to burn, then asking the most ridiculous question imaginable, whether the twins were definitely his, and Marcus laughed bitterly and said, "After everything we've been through, that's what you care about," without realizing that his confidence would soon become the very thing that unraveled the story he had spent years telling everyone. The next morning, I moved into a small guest house across town, leaving Marcus in the apartment he insisted belonged to him emotionally because he had paid the larger share of the mortgage. But before I signed anything or agreed to surrender a single asset, I contacted a family law attorney named Miriam Cole, a sharp, calm woman who listened without interrupting, and then asked me one question that changed the direction of my entire life. "Vanessa, when did you first become certain that the infertility problem was yours?" I told her I had never actually been certain, only that Marcus had made me feel certain. And when I mentioned an old medical envelope I had discovered years earlier but never opened because I was afraid of what it might contain, Miriam told me to find it before I made another decision. Inside that envelope were medical records from a private clinic in Portland that Marcus had visited before our marriage, and the results contained information he had deliberately hidden from me, showing that he had undergone testing years before we met and had been advised to receive further evaluation because of a serious fertility concern. I sat on the floor of that tiny guest house reading those pages again and again, realizing that for years I had carried shame that belonged to someone else, and instead of feeling victorious, I felt something far more painful because I remembered every birthday when Marcus had looked disappointed, every family gathering where his mother had whispered about grandchildren, and every night I had wondered what was wrong with me. Miriam began examining our financial records and discovered that the betrayal was much larger than an affair. Because during the previous 18 months, Marcus had quietly moved money from our shared investment account into a new account controlled partly by Chloe, disguising the transfers as renovation expenses and business consulting fees. Then, just as I thought I had finally uncovered the worst of it, I received a call from a man named Daniel Reeves, Chloe's former fiancé, who asked to meet me at a crowded cafe near Pioneer Square because he had something he believed I needed to know before Marcus destroyed both of our lives. Daniel arrived with a folder of screenshots, photographs, and dated messages that showed Chloe had been seeing Marcus while she was still involved with Daniel. But the most important evidence was not about the affair itself. It was a series of conversations in which Chloe repeatedly expressed uncertainty about the twins' biological father and admitted that Daniel could potentially be their father, because their relationship had briefly resumed around the same period she became pregnant. Daniel told me he had never wanted revenge and had no intention of using the children as weapons, but he could not watch Marcus abandon his marriage while confidently building a new life around children whose paternity had never been established. I confronted Chloe in the parking lot outside my attorney's office, and for the first time since the night everything collapsed, she looked like my little sister instead of the stranger who had walked into my marriage wearing someone else's future. She admitted that she had known there was uncertainty, but said Marcus had been so desperate to believe the Bobbies were his that she convinced herself the truth could wait, And when I asked why she had taken money from our shared accounts, she began crying and said Marcus had promised that once we divorced, he would make sure she never had to struggle financially again. A week later, Miriam arranged a settlement conference at a quiet law office overlooking the city, and Marcus arrived expecting me to be defeated, but instead he found financial documents, his old medical records, and Daniel's evidence arranged neatly across the table. Marcus's confidence disappeared when Miriam calmly explained that I would not surrender my share of the property or investments, and when he angrily accused me of trying to ruin his future, I finally answered, "You spent 8 years making me believe I ruined yours, so don't ask me to protect a future you built by destroying mine." The biggest confrontation came unexpectedly at Marcus's father's retirement dinner, where Chloe had planned to announce the twins' names and Marcus intended to present their new family as though our marriage had simply been an unfortunate chapter that he had outgrown. Before he could finish his speech, his older sister Rebecca stood and told everyone that she had learned about the hidden medical records, the financial transfers, and the paternity uncertainty. And when Marcus demanded to know who had told her, she looked directly at him and said, "Your lies became too expensive for everyone else to keep paying for." Marcus stared at Chloe and asked the question he had avoided for months, whether she could honestly promise that he was the twins' father, and after several seconds of silence, she finally whispered, "I can't." The room went completely quiet, but I did not feel satisfaction because the 2 unborn children had never betrayed anyone, and I told Marcus that whatever happened next, those Bobbies deserved adults who would protect them from the consequences of choices they had never made. The paternity test was eventually completed after the twins were born, and 3 weeks later Daniel received the result confirming that he was their biological father, while Marcus learned that the family he had risked everything to create had never been guaranteed to him in the first place. I expected the news to make me feel triumphant, but instead I felt strangely peaceful, because by then our divorce was nearly finalized. The house had been sold, my financial share was secured, and I had begun furnishing a modest condominium near the water where every room belonged to me and nobody could use silence, guilt, or disappointment to make me feel smaller. Months later, I ran into Marcus at a bookstore, and he admitted that he had spent years believing children would repair something inside him that he had never learned to confront, while I told him that children were never supposed to repair broken adults or prove that anyone was worthy of love. I did not hate him anymore, and I eventually told Chloe that forgiveness might someday be possible. But forgiveness would never mean returning to the old arrangement where family members could cross my boundaries simply because they shared my blood. And when I walked away from that conversation, I understood something I had spent years learning the hard way. Sometimes the greatest victory is not watching the people who hurt you suffer, but reaching the point where their choices no longer determine how you see yourself. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.